Hello, and welcome to Vandenberg Flash Focus, where we focus on the people and ideas that are making waves in Washington. Today, I'm really excited to dive into a topic that's extremely near and dear to my heart, which is, of course, Venezuela. And I'm honored to be talking to Cristina Burelli as our featured guest. Cristina has been a good friend of mine since I started working on the Venezuela file, and she's one of the leading experts on the topic for today, which is the Venezuelan gold industry. She's the founder of both SOS Orinoco and the V5 Initiative, which we'll speak more about shortly. Cristina, it's so nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Carrie. It's an honor for me as well. Thanks so much for shining the spotlight on this very, very important topic, which is Venezuelan gold.
Well, you have been the one that has been shining that spotlight, and we're the one that really originally brought it to my attention when I was working at the State Department. Before we dive into the specifics of what we're looking at with the U.S. relationship with Venezuelan gold and why it matters so much, you're the founder of SOS Orinoco and the V5 Initiative. I'd love for you to just give a little bit of detail on what you do on a daily basis and how long you've been in this field.
Yeah, so I guess for the past just over 10 years, when my husband and I founded V5 Initiative, we've been very focused on Venezuela. And our mission is to promote informed, transparent public policies to connect NGOs, civil society, decision takers who work in the region. Also, increasingly to empower indigenous voices. And that's kind of my passion as an anthropologist and my interest for over 40 years in Venezuela, but also local communities in Venezuela. And we use data to drive action, to monitor and to do advocacy. So for example, our program V360 is a way of looking at Venezuela through geospatial data. And through that hard data, we can promote transparency and citizen oversight. And the same thing with SOS Orinoco. So in 2018, when we started hearing rumors about illegal mining in Canaima, which is a World Heritage Site, it's the home to the world's tallest waterfall, Angel Falls, I was horrified. And it's like, how can this be that there's illegal mining in this unbelievable place? And we realized that there was a horrific situation, and that really the Venezuelan Amazon was becoming the Maduro regime's new economic engine after they had destroyed the traditional economic engine, which was oil and PDVSA. So my day-to-day life basically is a mix of investigative work, a lot of satellite monitoring, field intelligence, and then all that translates into policy advocacy. And so we're connecting what's happening on the ground in Venezuela with hopefully decisions that are happening in Washington, D.C., in Europe, in multi sort of national NGOs and so forth.
Well, and I really encourage any of our listeners who have not seen Canaima or Angel Falls to Google image search these, because they are some of the most beautiful places on the planet. I've never had the chance to view them in person. I hope to. Cristina and I were talking beforehand about when I'll eventually go to Venezuela once it is a free democracy. And I'm excited to see Angel Falls in particular. I have a beautiful photograph of it in my home. And Cristina, you mentioned that the oil sector, everybody knows the story of Venezuela's original richness because of its oil reserves, but how that really got plundered by the regime. And now recently, and the reason why you and I are speaking is that Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, visited Venezuela earlier this year. And he wasn't there to talk so much about the oil sector. He was speaking about gold and other critical minerals that Venezuela has. Can you give us a little sense of what the gold reserves and other mineral resources Venezuela has that the United States is interested in?
Yeah, so let's back up just a little bit. Venezuela never pitched itself as an Amazonian country. So most people, when they think of Amazonia, they don't think about Venezuela. They think about Brazil, maybe Colombia, maybe Peru, Ecuador, never Venezuela. And that was because Venezuela had so much oil that throughout the 20th century, Venezuela was producing oil. They were looking north. They were exporting their oil to the United States, to Europe, etc. And they pretty much ignored, the Venezuelan governments kind of ignored the South. They never had to look south to the Amazonian region. And that was for better and for worse. It was great because they had no need to exploit that part of the world. And so during the 20th century, all the Venezuelan governments respected and protected southern Venezuela. And that's about 500 square kilometers, which is about 193 square miles. It's huge. And 80% of that region south of the Orinoco River is still to this day protected because of its incredible biodiversity. And so going back to why this is so important, Venezuela sits on the Guyana Shield. And the Guyana Shield is a 1.7 billion year old geological formation that anchors a large share of the Amazon's intact forests. So in the Guyanas, and largely in Venezuela. Most of this Guyana Shield is in Venezuela, though it's a little bit in Brazil, Colombia, Guyana, Suriname, and so forth. There are 27 indigenous people in this region in Venezuela, and it also concentrates, because of its incredible antiquity, all these minerals. So gold, coltan, diamonds, all sorts of rare earths. And this is what's driving conflict and geopolitical interest.
Can you speak a little bit about who so-called runs gold mining in Venezuela and what role that industry has traditionally played in enriching the Venezuelan regime?
Yeah, so again, historically, there's always been gold mines. El Callao, which is kind of the main gold mining town, was active in the 19th century, and then obviously in the 20th century. So there was always gold, and there was always the myth of El Dorado and the pirates and everybody looking for this mythical city of El Dorado, and they were right because there was a lot of gold. But Venezuela was never, it wasn't like Peru. Because of the oil, everything was concentrated on exploiting oil, which was much easier than exploiting gold. Now, this changed dramatically under Chavez and then Nicolás Maduro, and particularly in 2016, once they had destroyed PDVSA and turned it into a huge laundromat for narcotics, and they were no longer producing 3 million barrels of oil a day like what they used to do, they turned their sights on southern Venezuela, where they knew that they had gold and all these critical minerals. And so in 2016, they illegally decreed the Orinoco Mining Arc. This is an area which is 432 square miles. It's larger than Cuba, just to give you an idea, larger than Portugal. And it's incredibly rich in gold, coltan, which is critical for electronics, rare earths, diamonds, and so forth. And it was illegally decreed. So this region, from 2016 onwards, has become basically a zone of anarchy, criminal extraction, where armed criminal groups, in partnership with leaders of the regime and the armed forces, exploit the minerals. And they control the territory, they control the mines, they exploit people. There is absolutely no respect for human rights, for labor laws. It's absolutely horrific. And in so doing, they're also destroying one of the most important biodiverse and ecosystems on the planet, which is this Guyana Shield. And the regime benefits directly on the entire supply chain. So they're selling access to protected areas. The regime, and I'm talking about the military and civilian authorities. Um, they sell. They have a monopoly on the fuel that is required in these mines. They sell the heavy machinery. They sell illegal mercury. Mercury is banned by law in Venezuela, and yet the armed forces has a monopoly on the smuggling of the mercury, which is used for gold mining. And ultimately, they also get a cut in the production of gold. And so, there are no serious mining companies in this area, despite efforts by the regime to invite mining companies since 2016. And we can talk about what that means currently. But what I can say is that since 2016, no serious mining company has set foot there because of the tremendous insecurity. So all we're seeing are like front companies for Venezuelan regime leaders and military leaders, but no serious company is working there. And gold has essentially become a sanctions evasion tool, a cash economy outside the formal system. 80% of the gold, and for that matter, all the minerals that are mined there, leave the country. They're smuggled out. They don't go through the central bank. And it's become a mechanism to reward loyalty within the regime.
Yeah, and I want to foot stomp this because when I was in government and we were looking at the gold mining issue, I was invited to actually present to the Senate on this particular issue, where I relied a lot on the research that you had produced and SOS Orinoco. And one of the things that I really want to highlight is recently there's been much discussion about groups like Cartel de los Soles, about groups like Tren de Aragua, the ELN, the FARC-D, all of these other elements which are declared foreign terrorist organizations. And in many cases, we were seeing these groups as being very operational, specifically in this space. Cartel de los Soles, for example, is a perfect example of where there would be foreign terrorist organizations that were paying off members of the armed forces to sort of turn the other cheek as they were trafficking illegal gold or drugs through this territory. So this is why we say it's very deeply connected to not just the regime, but to these terrorist organizations that have been a huge focus for the Trump administration.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible because this goes back to Chavez's kind of populist move to expropriate all the mining companies that were operating in southern Venezuela back in the early 2000s. So Canadian companies, even Russian companies, they're all expropriated. And he opened up these concessions to small miners. But very quickly, these mines and these concessions were overrun by armed criminal groups. Even people tied to somehow to the prisons, Tren de Aragua. This was the origins of Tren de Aragua, Tren de Guayana as well. And then in 2018, the at the time Minister of kind of Economics, Tarek El Aissami, who's now disappeared, imprisoned. We don't really know where he is. But Tarek El Aissami had the brilliant idea of outsourcing the cleaning of the mines to the ELN because the armed forces did not want to have blood on their hands. And so he called in the ELN and he brokered a deal with the ELN to come in and clean up the mines. And there were these horrific massacres. The ELN took control of some of these mines, but then never left. So they're still there. So what we're seeing is this hybrid criminal ecosystem with state actors, terrorist groups, organized crime, and looking at the current situation for U.S. and foreign mining companies who obviously have interest and curiosity, you cannot assume that you're going to have a clean counterpart. There is no meaningful separation between illegal and legal supply chains on the ground, and this is key.
And I would be really worried if I had a gold mining company, unintentionally supporting foreign terrorist organizations who are sanctioned and designated by the United States. One question I want to get to here is SOS Orinoco, shortly after Maduro was apprehended, noted that now regime leader Delcy Rodriguez was instrumental in turning southern Venezuela into what they called a, quote, violent state-sponsored extraction machine. You described a bit of that machine just now. What is the role of Delcy Rodriguez in the illegal gold mining trade, and how have other regime officials been involved or profited?
Yeah, so Delcy Rodriguez's role is very important to understand. She has been one of the key architects of the Orinoco mining arc business model. And I want to emphasize that the Orinoco mining arc isn't just a simple geographically designated region, which is the size of Cuba or Portugal. It goes way beyond that. It's a business model that applies to all of southern Venezuela. And now we're even seeing in northern Venezuela mining. But so this is a business model. And Delcy has been a key figure in Chavismo since 2016, holding very high level positions. So she was foreign minister between 2014 and 2017. She was president of the National Constituent Assembly. She was executive vice president from 2018 to 2026, when she was then put in this role by the Trump administration. So she has had a key kind of role in structuring all of this, but she also has very important interests in mines down in southern Venezuela. And we know that she has spent a lot of time down there. She had an office in one of the key cities, kind of overseeing this. In 2019, she actually wanted to bring in British mining companies, and she had this secret visit by, she invited Eric Prince down there. At the time, obviously, it was secret, to see if he could help her clean up the situation. That obviously didn't go anywhere. So under her leadership, this southern region has been militarized, financially integrated into the regime's survival strategy. And she has made sure that, this isn't just chaos. It's organized extraction with political oversight. And we have to really keep this very much in mind. And there are a few elements that really bring this home. So when Delcy Rodriguez was foreign minister, we, SOS Orinoco, we were trying to get UNESCO to go and do a kind of a technical trip to see what was going on in Canaima World Heritage Site. And it was unanimously approved by the World Heritage Center. They had a date in September 2022, and all of a sudden they were told they couldn't go. And an informant in the foreign ministry told us that Delcy Rodriguez had canceled the trip and had said, no, we're going to postpone, we have bad weather and so forth. Well, we're now midway 2026, and this reactive monitoring mission still doesn't have a date. And she's the one holding this back. She doesn't want UNESCO to see the chaos down there.
And I would just say, for those listeners who are hearing this and saying, this all sounds terrible for Venezuela, why does it really matter for the United States? I would point to two things, which gets us into our next topic. The first is, of course, because of the human rights violations, because of the control by foreign terrorist organizations, we're seeing, as you alluded to, significant human rights violations and health incidents. So, for example, Venezuela was one of the first tropical countries in the world, I think, to eradicate malaria. That was done back in, I think it was 1960, 1961. And because of the mechanism of artisanal gold mining, as they call it, it has brought malaria back to Venezuela. Then you have people who are being sex trafficked through this area, huge spikes in HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases, which are then moving outside of Venezuela as people are leaving the country because of the instability of the Maduro regime. So there is that health and humanitarian component. But then also the interest in the United States is because, as I mentioned, this Burgum visit. After he went to Venezuela, there have since been new general licenses that the United States has authorized. You recently wrote an op-ed specifically calling out these new general licenses, which are providing the U.S. an opportunity to get directly involved in this trade. Can you explain to our listeners what these licenses do and what your concern is for U.S. business involvement in this sector?
Yeah, so they issued an initial license, and then about a week later they modified the first one, 51A, and issued two other ones. And basically, in a nutshell, these licenses are opening pathways to trade in Venezuelan minerals, so gold, critical minerals, coltan, to provide services and equipment, and to negotiate future investments. So US entities can now buy, move, support, prepare deals around Venezuelan gold and minerals. However, they did not condition this. The US, Canada, UK, EU, all put sanctions on Venezuelan gold as a result of a OECD report that was published in 2022, and the conclusion of that report is that Venezuelan gold is high risk and potentially, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that it's financing terrorism and criminal organizations. So this is a huge red flag for gold refiners and anybody dealing with gold and critical minerals. And so to lift that sanction and issue these new licenses without any conditions is very contradictory. So here's what I see as the biggest contradiction. The US built its Venezuela policy. The Trump administration, justified extracting Maduro around a security narrative. So the need to crack down on narco trafficking, dismantling groups like Tren de Aragua, and cutting illicit finance. Gold, Venezuelan gold, is one of the main lifelines for these networks. We're seeing increasingly, not only in Venezuela, but in the whole Amazonian region, how narco trafficking and illegal gold are inextricably linked, because illegal gold mining is a very good way to launder narco trafficking. So the question is, how do you maintain this security posture while reopening access to the very revenue streams that sustain them? It makes no sense.
Are there any guardrails? I mean, so as you and I both know, Secretary Rubio, when he was a senator, was really focused specifically on gold mining and its implications for human rights, the environment, security. He was present at the hearing that I mentioned earlier, and might have even been the originator of that hearing. Given that, I mean, so what are the guardrails that we should be helping him push for? Is there any way in which the U.S. can actually be a partner to kind of de-radicalizing this area?
Absolutely. I mean, the U.S. should be imposing all kinds of conditions and standards to in order to issue these licenses. So the minimum guardrails, in our view, are, number one, full supply chain traceability from the mine to the market. Two, there should be independent environmental and human rights monitoring. Three, there should be an exclusion zone where armed groups are operating, and that's a lot. So, you're going to have to deal with that. But also the protected areas, the headwaters of the two main rivers in Venezuela, the Orinoco River, third largest river in volume in the world, and the Caroni River, which provides 70% of Venezuela's hydroelectric power. The headwaters are being destroyed by illegal mining. So these should be exclusion zones. There should be transparency on payments, so dollar for dollar accounting, and critically, no engagement without security sector reform in these mining regions. Obviously, the US can, if they're running Venezuela, as President Trump says, they should be able to enforce these, but they're not.
What else, before we close, would you like the listeners of this podcast to kind of understand about the Venezuelan gold industry and this sort of burgeoning relationship with the United States?
So I think it's very important for people, in the financial sector and, on the Hill, whatever, to kind of understand that the U.S. is heading into a period of increased scrutiny on financial integrity. We're in a FATF moment, it's the Financial Action Task Force moment, and the U.S. is going to be evaluated this year on this. So the expectation is that countries don't just have strong rules, but that they apply them consistently. And opening channels tied to high-risk gold trade raises huge questions about alignment between policy and practice. So that is something that, the U.S. government should be looking at, Treasury should be looking at. The other thing is that, Venezuela is going to become very quickly, if it hasn't already done so, the funnel through which illegal gold and illegal critical minerals from neighboring countries, so Colombia, Brazil, Guyana, start flowing through and will be greenwashed courtesy of the US government. It's not just the Venezuelan illegal mining, it's the neighboring countries. So I don't know if the US government realizes this. I don't know if Treasury realizes this, but this is the real risk, and this is what's happening as we speak.
Well, Cristina, thank you so much both for joining us today and for everything that you do. I really encourage everybody listening to follow what Cristina, SOS Orinoco, and the V5 Initiative are doing. They were the earliest ones to be raising this alarm. They are continuing to raise this alarm. And I think it's incredibly important that all of us, as we look to hopefully build a deeper, better relationship with an ultimately free and democratic Venezuela, that in the meantime, we're not inadvertently empowering some of those very same actors that caused us to originally intervene in the first place. So, Cristina, thank you so much for everything that you do and for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Flash Focus is a production of the Vandenberg Coalition. To connect and stay up to date on our work, follow our account on X @VandenbergCo or visit www.vandenbergcoalition.org to learn more and subscribe to our weekly newsletter on foreign policy and national security beyond the water's edge. Until next time, I'm Carrie Filipetti, and this is Vandenberg Flash Focus.